Hey, what up? Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and good night. This your boy, Outcast, GSM of the NSL Charlotte Hornets, and it's about 7:30 a.m. I needed to go ahead and knock this thing out, or otherwise my day was going to start, and I just never was going to get around to it. So, welcome to this edition of the Hive. I'm basically going to just kind of recap my off season and what my plans are pretty much going forward. So as you all know, I finally got the Luka for Ja Morant trade done, and I don't really have no complaints. I mean, part of that trade was essentially to turn Luka into at the minimum, two productive players. Essentially, I always felt like I was shorthanded a little bit as far as offensive firepower. Everything really always centered around Luka, and there was never really a fallback. My second best player was always another guard that was either considered too small or just not nearly on the same level for one reason or another. Which triggered the first part of that trade, which brought over Kristaps Porzingis, as we all know, the quote-unquote original unicorn, 7'3", 240 pounds, stretch 4, stretch 5, whatever you want to call him. So I was pretty excited to get him, and we went on a little bit of a run at the end of the season, got into the play-in, got knocked out by the Wizards, of course. And then after that, it was pretty much the waiting game for the second part of that deal, which brought over Ja Morant and a number of other pieces, other players. I can't recap the exact details. It's been 100 years, and I was just glad to get it over with. I ground out a bunch of articles to get my GM point situation to where it was. And now the focus is pretty much free agency. Ideally, I made a couple of deals in free agency that I was hoping that would kind of set the team up for like the next 2 to 3 years. And by that, I didn't want, as great as KP is, I didn't want him as the center. Based off of last year's game mentioned anyway, I didn't want him as the center. I felt like he would be better as a stretch 4. And that with Dedmon probably not returning to the league, because he's not a starter. I traded for him. I think I got him from the Spurs, and I think shortly after I got him, he got waived, and then he ended up in Philly, and then from there, I don't expect him to be back in the league anytime soon. So that was not a solution at center. I was holding on to his rights. I had planned to hold on to his rights with the idea that the NBA Dallas Mavericks would sign and trade him to some other team, or if he didn't get signed and traded, he would just go to another team for essentially some portion of the MLE. So I had hung on to his rights, just waiting to see what would happen, because if he was MLE, that limits the amount of teams that could probably sign for him in our league. So I was just kind of hanging on to that just to see where he would end up. And in the meantime, I knew I needed a more permanent solution at center, and I had a deal in place for Dylan Brooks, and my goal was to trade for Dylan, to lock in the Dylan Brooks trade, and then cut some cap, create a TPE of some sort, and then use some of the stuff I got from the Luka trade for a center. And part of the trade for Dylan Brooks was I was going to get Derek White, and I really like Derek White. Simply because he's not really the biggest guard, but his speed and defensive ability just made him something that I figured would mesh well alongside Ja Morant and I was under the impression that that would make a very good backcourt. But as the deals started coming together, because I had like 3 or 4 deals that had been on hold for months, waiting for me to resolve the whole GM point situation. So I got to the point where, with further comp analysis, the Dylan Brooks deal wasn't going to work. You know, I talked to Nails and was like, yeah, I could do this deal, but I won't be able to fill out the roster. And fill out the roster included, by all means, retaining Fred VanVleet's bloated contract. And so between the hard cap that would trigger at $172 million plus VanVleet's bloated contract, I wasn't going to be able to fill out the roster. It would have been impossible. So thanks to flexibility from Nails, he was willing to kind of like move in another direction with that trade, and I began to focus on filling out the starting lineup, presumably filling out the starting lineup. So I moved out Mike Conley, which would have created a TPE of about $24 million. But Terry Rozier came up as a possible player that I could get. And Terry Rozier, even though it historically hasn't really been that effective in our league, but I've always liked this game for the most part, because he's almost like an inside-out scorer. He can get to the basket. I mean, he's a little bit streaky on three-pointers, but he can get to the basket. He can put pressure on the defense. So I got to looking at that, and then the Jusuf Nurkic hit the trade block, and so I was like, yo, I would definitely be interested in Jusuf Nurkic, because what that does is that now I have a center. I can plug him at center and plug KP at power forward. Granted, I retained Draymond Green. I now have a small forward, and I can alternate between Terry Rozier and FVB as shooting guard, and have John Morant as a starter. Granted, John Morant's going to be out for the first 5-6 weeks. I now have a starting point guard in the FMV, and I have a starting shooting guard in Terry Rozier. So what that does is that filled out the starting lineup for the most part. And with all these guys being, 3 years or more on their contract, now I could just focus on what I want to do to fill out the bench, which was the situation that I was hoping to be better prepared for. When Porzingis signed his extension, that just really kind of got the ball rolling. I was like, okay, cool, that risk paid off. He signed an extension. He's got 2 additional years. Draymond Green signed his contract for 3 years plus, I think, 3 years plus an option. And then, I got Terry Rozier, who is a little bit undersized. He's like 6'2" or something like that, but he's a scoring off guard. And then we got FEV to handle my point of attack. So I figured that, so right now in my brain, there's no John Morant. And you can see that because what I did is when, halfway through the sim testing, I just took John Morant out the lineup. Because I'm eventually going to see what that looks like anyway. I mean, John Morant is going to average 30 or more a game and be able to put pressure on the defense. The issue now is what does everybody else do? How effective are the other players going to be? And I've started to really analyze that. I only just received 2K24 on PC last night. So I let it download all night, so I haven't really kind of messed around with it yet. And historically, I don't sim test my own team too much, but I probably will, simply in this particular instance, because I noticed a very strange stat with all the games that my team had run. At the time that I was working these numbers, my team had run 12 sims, and now they have 13, so these numbers aren't really factored into the 13th game. Is not really factored in to my numbers per se, but the fact that they won the game lets me know that something's there. And one of the things I noticed is that with Ja Morant, the starters average 89 points a game with just the starters. And without Ja Morant, the starters average 86. So there's a 3-point differential in what the starters are able to produce. So on paper, there's almost no difference between having Ja Morant and not having Ja Morant in the lineup. 3 points is 3 points. I mean, that's a made shot or a missed shot or an and one. It's a buzzer beater. It's such a thin margin that I feel like I got some room to work there. And for me, the issue is efficiency. Terry Rozier is balling out. I mean, just like when I moved him to the starting lineup, I knew he would score, but I didn't know that he would score like at the rate that he's doing. And ironically enough, I got a text from someone and we were talking about it, and he was mentioning, that Terry Rozier, he's scoring, but he's inefficient. Ironically, his numbers are the same as Jalen Green's, who's a number of inches taller. I presumably, I don't even know. He's not my player. He's not on my radar. But I just happened to notice that they had the same numbers as far as points per game as a starter and field goal percentage and stuff like that. So the numbers are very similar. So I think the defense is fine. It's the inefficiency. The defense, I got fervently Draymond Green, and I got Porzingis. I mean, you're not going to. The era of elite defenses is dead, and so we don't necessarily need to stock up on all these like defensive players. I think if you can position your team to take advantage of the other team's inefficiencies, that's going to matter more. And that's really kind of where my team is getting beat, is offensive inefficiency. Just little weird things. Like Terry Rozier will go into the paint, and instead of kicking the ball out, he will pump fake and then try and shoot over somebody that's 4 inches taller than him. What? It's little things like that. If that becomes a kick out and the offense resets, they can get a better look. It doesn't mean that there's a guarantee they're going to score, but it creates another way for them to have a better shot opportunity. So this is all playbook stuff, just finding the right playbook and getting them to execute off of that, because a 6'2" guard is averaging 22, 23 points a game. As a starter is extremely useful, and moving him to the bench as he was before. I mean, his efficiency is the same as a starter as it was on the bench. So again, that's all playbook, and most likely he was coming off the bench as a shooting guard with Ja Morant, and I think though that when the season starts, he's probably going to come off the bench as a point guard. I think that if he's just going to shoot that much, he might as well just have the ball, just started to play from beginning to end. The way I look at it. So we will see how that shakes down. Another thing that I noticed is that with Ja Morant, Kristaps Porzingis actually has more time with the ball. He doesn't necessarily have more touches, but he has more time with the ball. And I think that's pretty interesting. Ironically, because I can't remember what I did, and I don't know, I don't think I'll have access to the old patch, but I'm no longer sure if the before and after Ja Morant is the same playbook. So that might have something to do with why Porzingis has same amount of touches, but a significant difference in time with the ball. So these are things that matter, because if Porzingis has the ball more, then in theory he should have more shot attempts, but he didn't have more shot attempts versus when Ja Morant was on the court. So that's just something I have to look at. And these are kind of the things that I look at when I'm trying to figure out which lineups to do, which playbooks to use and stuff like that. I'm looking at how effective these different lineups are together. And I don't know if you guys ever seen it, but we have a page where you can see how each one of your lineups works, how much time they spend on the court together, and what they're able to do based off of advanced numbers. And that's usually a tool that I like to use as well. And that's why every now and then you might see me throw a funky lineup out there, and it's usually because for 5 minutes these 5 players play together and they produce X amount level of efficiency. So I don't think we have that data right now with the quote-unquote preseason version of what we're doing now, which is basically still slider testing. And so I am under the impression that with a little luck, I will be able to retain Draymond Green, who is a big part of what I'm trying to accomplish. And I had a little discussion with, I can't remember which GM it was, but we were discussing the new rule about the glitch players being rated. They're just basically what it boils down to is that if you have a player that's rated so much, he's performing so much better than his NBA counterpart, he's being treated like a higher tier player. So we were discussing that, and it was misunderstood that I didn't care about the rule change. Well, actually, I do care about the rule change. It just doesn't change my strategy, because best case scenario, I retain my 2 bloated contract guys, Draymond Green and FEV, and based off of what I've been able to determine, I really won't be able to use any MLE that I am granted during free agency. The team's just, the cap situation is so ridiculous that I won't be able to use the MLE the way that I want to. I can probably sign a cheap MLE player and then, a bunch of MLE guys. I haven't really worked it out yet, because a lot of that you don't really know until free agency starts. But what I was indicating is that the rule change makes sense to me based off of the league's history, but it doesn't impact my strategy, because I know what it is that I want to do out of free agency. I know what I'm trying to accomplish, and if certain players are weighted differently now, then I either still need that kind of player or I don't. So my strategy is essentially whatever I need to do to get this type of player. It doesn't really change. It's not about whether it affects my team or not specifically. It's just about the preparation for that point in time. Now, one of the things that I want to be sure about is that I have to start a lineup locked in. Again, I don't anticipate somebody being able to, or signing away Draymond Green or signing away FEV, but you still have to be prepared for that. It just, every year we see a team where the GM just assumes he's going to be able to resign his guy, and then that player ends up going to another team. And usually it's because the GM either wasn't paying attention or he just didn't think anybody was going to bid on his guy, and then he lost him. And that happens more historically. It's always happened over the years. That type of thing has happened. And if I lost one or two of these guys, or one or both of these guys, it still doesn't change my strategy all that much. It's funny because if I lost FEV, now I no longer have to worry about being over the second apron. It becomes a different kind of relief. in the sense. Let's say I keep Draymond Green and I lose Fred VanVleet. Now I have a normal cap situation. I don't have guys making $40 million who's worth who in trade value to equal his contract. You need 3 other players. You know, 2 $20 million players or 3 players that are 12 or so. You know what I mean? So, but it changes, and then that would give me like a full MLE. So it would make me a normal team cap wise. Draymond Green situation a little bit different because he's the starting small forward. Granted, FEV is the starting point guard, but because John Morant will be coming back soon, eventually, he would, what happens to FEV? Is he going to be on the bench? Is he going to start? I mean, it's just, in theory, he's going to start, but it's just, historically, I used to put less. I always had a little bit of extra value on retaining your own players because free agency was always a hot mess in its own degree where there's just lots of players out there to choose from. Now, the pickings are a lot slimmer. And so retaining your own players has a lot more, it's a higher level of importance because, and we were just talking about this in the chat, about the James Harden situation. I think that a player, cap space is just less valuable now than it has been, and historically. You go into the offseason, 30 million, 40 million in cap space. All that really means is that you have to overpay for a player that isn't really worth the salary, and then it hamstrings you on whatever else that you might need to do going forward. But if you already have that player, his contract now gives you, 2 other players, 3 other players, another player plus player voucher. Having those contracts is just, the free agency is really just for. You used to be able to build a team out of free agency. You can't anymore. You have to. Free agency is now strictly, in my viewpoint, a way to fill out the roster. So, for instance, even if someone, so let's say it's a GM who's sitting around planning to make some moves and clear up $40 million in cap space. So to clear up that $40 million in cap space, he has to move at the bare minimum, 20, 30 million in contracts to dig out. So those are 3 or 4 players that he's throwing out just to get one guy who's a borderline all-star. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And then there is the whole idea that you can sign him, so you can trade him later, kind of like what happened with Beal last year. I don't know if Fred has the same kind of value. Now, he's playing extremely well for me in these preseason games. I am not going to deny that. I mean, he's playing, I won't say quite all-star level because you got the other guards playing much better. SGA, Kyrie Irving, Luka, all those guys are playing. Deron Williams, De'Aaron Fox, not De'Aaron. Boy, I am tired, all right? But all those other guys are playing much better, but he is holding his own. He's playing it a way where I can go, okay, you know what? The point guard position is okay until John Morant gets here. So he's playing like that. So I feel like that's something that I don't have to worry about. But it's definitely its own little challenge because I think in order to keep both of these guys, I still have to get up to the full GM point allotment, which is 150. I'm not at 150 right now. I'm at 91, and there's like a week and a half left before free agency starts. I need the 150 because I have to bid like 65, 70 to, at a minimum, to possibly retain Draymond Green, and then I have to make a move to refill what's left, which would be 30 or 40 GM points. I need to get back up to 99 in free agency just to make sure that I'm able to retain Fred VanVleet, who I do not have a re-sign bonus for. So it's an interesting conundrum to be in, because of course if John Morant was not suspended, I wouldn't even be worried about Fred VanVleet. I would probably let him walk, to be honest. I just not looking forward to going through the season with a cap hit of about 180. I think the numbers I put together, that once I sign everybody, minimums and stuff like that, my cap hit is like 180 or something like that. The upside is that next year the cap jumps around 10 million or so, and Porzingis' contract drops 7 million. So that'll put me below the second apron for next season. My starters will still be intact. In theory, I'll still have, the same 5 starters who are under contract for another 2 years. And I'll have MLE, and I'll be able to fill out the roster a little bit better going into next season. So this year, it's really about keeping the guys that I got, those 2 core guys, Fred VanVleet and Draymond Green, and then just being patient until next season. I had last year I dropped a couple of contracts. I waived a couple of players that I didn't think would be around next season or this coming season. I dropped these players thinking that they probably would be around on my team anyway, and took a few flyers. 2 of those flyers paid off. 2 of those guys did get 2-way contracts this season. So now my 2-way situation is pretty much settled. We get one more 2-way guy to get, and then from there it's just filling out the roster. So part of that gamble did pay off. And it's amazing how sometimes we have to plan, 1, 2, 3 years in advance just to field a team that we're happy with, whether it's to be competitive or whether it's to tank. It just takes a little bit of time to kind of think all these different steps ahead. And ideally, I will have the level of patience required to kind of see this thing through, which is essentially to fill out the roster with the starting core being relatively productive for the most part, perhaps maybe squeeze into another play-in round, and then hit the offseason with a little bit more cap flexibility, and can add players other than a bunch of minimums, which is probably what I'm going to end up having going into this offseason. So, going into this coming season. Well, I'm sitting with the keyboard in my lap, and it somehow hit. I'm twisting in my chair. Somehow it hit the key, hit the button, and killed the recording. But basically, hopefully going into what I was saying, hopefully going into this season, I can fill out the roster and just kind of be patient enough to kind of see the whole thing through. And that way I can get into the next off season with the core still intact, and then the roster flexibility to kind of do a little bit more and make the team a little bit more competitive. So I'm really looking forward to free agency and seeing what kind of minimum guys that I can get. Hopefully I can get a couple of key guys that can contribute to keeping the team afloat until John Morant is able to play. And I essentially just look at it as a guy that was, out on injury. He's out on injury, he's out 6 weeks. So that's kind of the way that I'm looking at it right now. And ideally, we will just be able to hold down the fort and see what happens. I think that even once he gets back, I'll have guys who are missing games, so I won't really get to see the impact of that lineup probably until the middle of January, maybe. So, but I'm pretty excited about that. I was happy to finally get that trade done. As I mentioned before, I was really kind of ready to get off the Luka train. It didn't really pan out the way that I wanted, and low key, I have to have a better record than Leroy. You know, we basically traded a superstar point guard, and I like what he's done. I like the way that he's built around Luka, and because he wasn't as inhibited as I was. I was inhibited by not wanting Luka to play point guard. So he wasn't inhibited by that. He's just like, okay, this is the point guard, and I want this player to play this player and this player. So I like what he's done with the team. He's complaining that it's not good enough, but that's just old-fashioned Leroy modesty. I think that with a couple of key players, that team is going to turn the corner and be very hard to stop offensively. You can already see them gelling. The two-man game between Siakam and Luka is really just kind of going to be lethal. I saw he made a comment about wanting Luka to put up video game numbers, but he won't need him to. Luka brings so much to the table. You don't need him to put up video game numbers because he's handling the ball. He's grabbing rebounds. He's finding the right player. He's putting up his own points. He's just doing so many things. And even though he's not great defensively, he's just so much bigger than every other guard that matters. And he has improved defensively over last year. I looked at his rating, so he's definitely a little bit better defensively than last year. So the video game numbers, 30 points a game, will come. But I think that right now, Luka's value is in everything else that he does. And that's going to be a good team. Hopefully my team just won't look as bad as it does right now. Hopefully we will finish the season with similar records, or hopefully my record will be better than his. Ideally, I want my record to be better than his because I just don't want a Luka-led team to be better than my team. But that's just, competitive fire. You know what I mean? So we'll see. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I think that I got to stitch these two videos together, but I appreciate you guys checking it out. Looking forward to free agency. I'm going to see if I can start doing something a little bit more frequently. I know I always say that, but my time is always mismanaged. So we will see. Take it easy. See you next time, and good luck in free agency.